The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training ground as Captain Sarah Martinez adjusted her combat boots for the third time. 26 years old and standing barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, she had learned early in her military career that preparation was everything. Her fellow soldiers were already gathering around the weapons depot, their voices carrying a mix of excitement and nervous energy that always preceded live-fire exercises. Sarah had been serving in the United States Army for 8 years, working her way up from private to captain through sheer determination and skill. She specialized in weapons training and had earned a reputation as one of the finest marksmen in her battalion. Her colleagues respected her not because she demanded it, but because she had proven herself countless times in both training scenarios and real combat situations during her 2 deployments overseas. The weapons sergeant, Master Sergeant Johnson, began distributing rifles to the assembled soldiers. These were M4 carbines, the standard issue weapon that Sarah knew like the back of her hand. She had fired thousands of rounds through similar rifles, trained recruits on their operation, and could disassemble and reassemble one blindfolded in under 2 minutes. When Johnson reached Sarah, he handed her a rifle that immediately felt different. The weight distribution was off, and as she performed her standard inspection, she noticed several concerning issues. The bolt carrier group moved sluggishly, the trigger had excessive play, and, worst of all, the barrel showed signs of dangerous where that could cause misfires or even catastrophic failure. Sarah approached Johnson privately, keeping her voice low to avoid causing alarm among the other soldiers. She explained the rifle's condition and requested a replacement. Johnson barely glanced at the weapon before shaking his head dismissively. "That's the rifle you're assigned today, Captain. Make it work." His tone carried an edge that Sarah recognized immediately. She had encountered this attitude before, the subtle undermining that some male soldiers directed toward their female colleagues. It wasn't always overt, but it was persistent and demoralizing. Sometimes it came disguised as joking or testing, other times it was more direct like this moment. Sarah knew that Johnson was aware of the rifle's condition. As the weapons sergeant, he was responsible for maintaining and inspecting all firearms before distribution. The fact that he had specifically given her a defective weapon while issuing properly functioning rifles to the male soldiers was no accident. The training exercise was scheduled to begin in 20 minutes. Around her, soldiers were checking their equipment and reviewing the day's objectives. The exercise involved precision shooting at various distances, movement under simulated combat conditions, and equipment reliability testing. Using a faulty rifle wouldn't just compromise Sarah's performance, it could be dangerous. Sarah's military training had taught her to adapt and overcome obstacles, but this situation presented a unique challenge. She could continue to protest the rifle assignment, potentially creating a scene that would reflect poorly on her reputation as a team player. She could attempt to complete the exercise with the defective weapon, risking poor performance that might be attributed to her skills rather than equipment failure. Or she could find another solution entirely. Looking around the training ground, Sarah noticed several things that others might have missed. The exercise was being observed by Colonel Williams, the base commander, along with several visiting officers from other installations. Media representatives were also present, documenting the battalion's training procedures for a feature article about military readiness. The political implications weren't lost on Sarah. The military was under increasing scrutiny regarding equal treatment of female soldiers. Recent news stories had highlighted various instances of discrimination and bias within the ranks. Any incident today could become part of a larger narrative, potentially affecting not just her career, but the perception of women in combat roles throughout the service. Sarah's mind raced through her options. She thought about her younger sister Maria, who had recently expressed interest in joining the military. She thought about the female recruits she had trained and mentored over the years. Most importantly, she thought about the principle at stake, the idea that every soldier, regardless of gender, deserved to be treated with respect and given proper equipment to do their job effectively. Master Sergeant Johnson was now briefing the group on safety procedures and exercise objectives. Sarah listened while continuing to examine the rifle more thoroughly. The firing pin showed excessive wear, the gas system was partially obstructed, and the magazine well had damage that could cause feeding problems. This wasn't just a subpar weapon, it was genuinely dangerous. As Johnson finished his briefing and the soldiers began moving to their assigned positions, Sarah made her decision. She wasn't going to accept substandard treatment or equipment. She wasn't going to quietly endure discrimination for the sake of avoiding conflict. Instead, she was going to demonstrate exactly why she had earned her rank and reputation. Sarah approached the weapons depot, where several spare rifles were secured. Using her command access, she retrieved a properly functioning M4 carbine and quickly performed her inspection routine. This rifle was in excellent condition, exactly what every soldier should receive for a training exercise. When Master Sergeant Johnson noticed the switch, he immediately confronted Sarah in front of the assembled soldiers and observers. "Captain Martinez, I specifically assigned you that rifle. Return it immediately and use the one you were given." His voice was loud enough that everyone present could hear, including Colonel Williams and the media representatives. The training ground fell silent as all attention focused on the confrontation. Sarah stood at attention, holding both rifles. Her voice was clear and professional as she responded. "Master Sergeant Johnson, the rifle you assigned me has multiple safety violations and mechanical failures that make it unsuitable for use in any training exercise. As a commissioned officer responsible for the safety of personnel under my command, I cannot in good conscience use defective equipment that poses a risk to myself and others." Johnson's face reddened as he realized the situation was escalating beyond his control. Colonel Williams and the other observers were now paying close attention to the exchange, clearly interested in how it would be resolved. "The rifle is perfectly functional, Captain. Your refusal to use assigned equipment constitutes insubordination." Sarah had anticipated this response. She knew that Johnson was trying to put her in an impossible position, either use dangerous equipment or face disciplinary action for disobeying orders. However, her military training and leadership experience had prepared her for exactly this type of situation. "Sir, I respectfully request that you personally inspect both weapons and verify their condition before proceeding with this exercise." The challenge was direct, but professional. Sarah was betting that Johnson wouldn't risk examining the rifles closely in front of senior officers and media representatives, because doing so would reveal either his incompetence in equipment maintenance or his deliberate attempt to sabotage her performance. Colonel Williams stepped forward, sensing the tension and recognizing the need for command intervention. As the senior officer present, he had the authority to resolve the situation, but his decision would set a precedent for how similar conflicts would be handled throughout the command. "Master Sergeant Johnson, bring both rifles here for inspection." The weapons sergeant had no choice but to comply with the colonel's direct order. As he approached with the rifles, Sarah could see the realization dawning on his face that his actions were about to be exposed in the most public way possible. Colonel Williams was an experienced infantry officer with over 20 years of service. He had handled countless weapons throughout his career and could identify problems quickly and accurately. His inspection of Sarah's original rifle took less than 30 seconds before his expression turned grim. The defective rifle showed clear evidence of poor maintenance and dangerous wear patterns. The bolt carrier group was corroded, the barrel showed signs of potential failure, and the trigger mechanism was so worn that it could fire unexpectedly. Any experienced weapons handler would have immediately recognized these problems. Colonel Williams then examined the replacement rifle that Sarah had selected. It was in excellent condition, properly maintained, and completely suitable for training exercises. The contrast between the two weapons was stark and undeniable. The colonel's voice carried the authority of his rank and the weight of his disappointment as he addressed Johnson. "Master Sergeant, this weapon is completely unserviceable and should have been tagged for armor repair weeks ago. How did it end up in the training rotation?" Johnson stammered through an attempted explanation, but his excuses only made the situation worse. It became clear to everyone present that he had either failed in his basic duties as weapons sergeant or had deliberately issued defective equipment to Captain Martinez. Colonel Williams turned to Sarah, his expression showing both respect and concern. "Captain Martinez, you showed excellent judgment in refusing to use this weapon. Your actions today prevented a potential safety incident and demonstrated the kind of leadership we expect from our officers." The media representatives were taking notes and photographs throughout the exchange. Sarah realized that this moment would likely be reported beyond the military community, potentially influencing public perception of women in combat roles and military leadership. As the immediate crisis resolved and the exercise continued with Sarah using proper equipment. She reflected on the broader implications of what had occurred. The incident wasn't just about one defective rifle or one biased sergeant. It was about the ongoing struggle for equal treatment and respect within military ranks. Sarah's decision to stand her ground had been risky. Military culture emphasized following orders and maintaining unit cohesion. Challenging a non-commissioned officer in front of senior leadership and media representatives could have ended her career if the situation had developed differently. However, Sarah's military training had also taught her that true leadership sometimes required taking calculated risks to uphold important principles. Her refusal to accept substandard treatment wasn't just about personal pride. It was about ensuring that all soldiers received the respect and equipment they deserved. As the training exercise progressed, Sarah's performance was exceptional. Using properly functioning equipment, she demonstrated the marksmanship skills and tactical knowledge that had earned her reputation as one of the battalion's finest soldiers. Her fellow soldiers, who had witnessed the confrontation with Johnson, showed increased respect for her willingness to stand up for what was right. The incident with the broken rifle became a turning point not just for Sarah's career, but for discussions about equality and respect within the military. Colonel Williams initiated a comprehensive review of equipment distribution procedures and began investigating whether similar incidents had occurred with other female soldiers. Master Sergeant Johnson faced disciplinary action for his failure to properly maintain weapons and his discriminatory treatment of Captain Martinez. The investigation revealed a pattern of similar behavior toward female soldiers under his supervision, leading to his eventual reassignment and demotion. For Sarah, the experience reinforced her commitment to military service and her responsibility as a leader to ensure fair treatment for all soldiers. She understood that her actions that day had implications far beyond her personal situation. They were part of a larger effort to create a military environment based on merit, respect, and equality. The broken rifle incident demonstrated that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought against external enemies, but against internal prejudices and systemic problems that undermine military effectiveness and morale. Sarah's courage in confronting these issues head-on showed that true strength comes not from accepting unfair treatment, but from standing up for principles that benefit everyone. As the sun began to set on the training ground and soldiers prepared to return to base, Sarah cleaned and secured her rifle with the same attention to detail she brought to every aspect of her military service. The day's events had reminded her why she had chosen this career path and strengthened her resolve to continue serving with honor and integrity. The media coverage of the incident would eventually reach audiences far beyond the military community, inspiring discussions about leadership, courage, and the ongoing evolution of military culture. But, for Sarah, the most important outcome was knowing that she had stood up for what was right and potentially made it easier for other soldiers to do the same in the future. 3 weeks after the training ground incident, Captain Sarah Martinez found herself sitting across from Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Hayes, the newly appointed Equal Opportunity Advisor for the base. The conference room was sterile and official, with military regulations posted on the walls and the American flag standing prominently in the corner. Hayes had requested this meeting as part of a comprehensive investigation into discriminatory practices within the battalion. The media attention following the broken rifle incident had created ripple effects throughout the military command structure. News outlets had picked up the story, framing it as an example of the challenges faced by women in military service. Social media discussions had amplified the narrative, with veterans and active duty personnel sharing their own experiences of discrimination and bias. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes was a career military officer with a background in military justice and personnel management. She had been brought in specifically to investigate the climate within Sarah's battalion and determine whether the incident with Master Sergeant Johnson represented an isolated occurrence or part of a broader pattern of discriminatory behavior. Sarah had prepared for this interview by documenting her experiences over the past 8 years of military service. She had kept detailed records of training exercises, performance evaluations, and interactions with supervisors and colleagues. What emerged from this documentation was a troubling pattern of subtle but persistent differential treatment. Hayes reviewed Sarah's file while asking pointed questions about specific incidents and interactions. Sarah described numerous occasions when she had been assigned inferior equipment, excluded from certain training opportunities, or subjected to comments and behavior that would have been unacceptable if directed toward male soldiers. One particularly revealing example involved a combat leadership course that Sarah had been scheduled to attend 6 months earlier. The course was essential for career advancement and was typically offered to all officers at her rank level. However, Sarah's participation had been canceled at the last minute, with Johnson citing scheduling conflicts and training priorities. When Sarah had inquired about alternative dates or makeup opportunities, she was told that the course was fully booked for the remainder of the year. Meanwhile, 2 male officers who had joined her unit after her had been approved for the same course within weeks of their arrival. Hayes made careful notes as Sarah recounted this and similar incidents. The pattern that emerged suggested a systematic effort to limit Sarah's professional development and advancement opportunities. This wasn't the result of oversight or administrative error. It appeared to be deliberate sabotage disguised as routine personnel management. The investigation expanded beyond Sarah's individual experiences as Hayes interviewed other female soldiers within the battalion. What she discovered was alarming, but not entirely surprising to those familiar with military culture and the ongoing challenges of integration. Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez, a combat medic with 12 years of experience, reported similar patterns of discrimination. She had been passed over for promotion despite exemplary performance evaluations and had frequently been assigned to support roles rather than frontline positions that would enhance her career prospects. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Chun, an intelligence specialist, described instances where her professional opinions and analyses had been dismissed or questioned in ways that male colleagues never experienced. She had observed meetings where her contributions were ignored until a male officer presented identical information, which was then praised and implemented. The interviews revealed that discrimination within the battalion was not limited to equipment assignment or training opportunities. It encompassed a broad range of behaviors designed to undermine the confidence, performance, and career advancement of female soldiers. Hayes also interviewed male soldiers within the unit to gain a complete picture of the battalion's culture. Many were supportive of their female colleagues and expressed frustration with the discriminatory practices they had witnessed. However, few had spoken up about these issues, citing concerns about military hierarchy and the potential impact on their own careers. Lieutenant Michael Thompson, a platoon leader who had worked closely with Sarah on several training exercises, provided particularly valuable testimony. He confirmed that Sarah had consistently performed at or above the level of her male counterparts, but had faced obstacles and challenges that others did not encounter. Thompson described specific instances where Johnson had made disparaging comments about female soldiers, questioned their physical capabilities, and expressed the view that women did not belong in combat roles. These comments had been made in the presence of other soldiers, creating an environment where discrimination was normalized and tacitly accepted. The investigation also uncovered evidence of a broader network of bias within the battalion's leadership structure. Several non-commissioned officers had engaged in similar discriminatory practices, suggesting that the problem extended well beyond Johnson's individual actions. As the investigation progressed, Hayes began to understand the systematic nature of the discrimination that female soldiers were facing. It wasn't simply a matter of individual prejudice. It was an institutional problem that required comprehensive reform to address effectively. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her regular duties while the investigation proceeded. She noticed changes in how colleagues and supervisors interacted with her. Some showed increased support and respect, recognizing her courage in speaking out about discriminatory practices. Others seemed to distance themselves, perhaps concerned about being associated with controversy or worried about their own involvement in the issues being investigated. The media attention continued to generate discussion about gender equality in the military. Sarah received messages of support from veterans, active duty personnel, and civilians who appreciated her willingness to stand up for fair treatment. However, she also faced criticism from those who viewed her actions as disruptive to military order and discipline. Colonel Williams had initially supported Sarah's actions during the training ground incident, but the expanding investigation created political pressure that complicated his position. The base was under scrutiny from higher command levels, and there were concerns about the potential impact on unit readiness and morale. Sarah understood the complex dynamics at play. Military organizations prioritized unit cohesion and operational effectiveness above individual concerns. Her decision to challenge discriminatory practices, while legally and morally justified, had created complications that extended far beyond her personal situation. During this period, Sarah received an unexpected visit from her former commanding officer, Major General Patricia Stone, who had been promoted to a Pentagon position. Stone had served as Sarah's mentor during her early career and had been instrumental in her professional development. General Stone's visit was unofficial, but her message was clear. She praised Sarah's courage and integrity while also providing guidance about navigating the political complexities of the situation. Stone had faced similar challenges during her own career advancement and understood the delicate balance between advocating for change and maintaining military effectiveness. The general shared her perspective on the broader implications of Sarah's actions. The military was under increasing pressure to demonstrate genuine commitment to equality and inclusion. Recent congressional hearings had highlighted persistent problems with sexual harassment and discrimination within the armed forces, creating political imperatives for meaningful reform. Sarah's case had become symbolic of these larger issues, making her both an inspiration for change and a target for those resistant to reform. Stone advised Sarah to continue focusing on her professional duties while allowing the investigation to proceed through proper channels. As the investigation neared completion, Hayes presented her preliminary findings to Colonel Williams and the base command staff. The evidence of systematic discrimination was overwhelming and undeniable. The investigation had documented dozens of incidents involving multiple female soldiers across several years. The findings revealed that discriminatory practices were deeply embedded in the battalion's culture and operations. Equipment assignment, training opportunities, performance evaluations, and career advancement decisions all showed patterns of bias that disadvantaged female soldiers. Hayes recommended comprehensive reforms, including mandatory bias training for all personnel, revised equipment distribution procedures, enhanced oversight of performance evaluations, and disciplinary action for individuals found to have engaged in discriminatory practices. The recommendation also called for the reassignment or removal of several key personnel, including Master Sergeant Johnson and 2 other non-commissioned officers who had been identified as primary sources of discriminatory behavior. Colonel Williams faced a difficult decision. Implementing the recommended reforms would require acknowledging that serious problems had existed under his command. This could negatively impact his career prospects and reputation. However, failure to address the issues could result in continued discrimination and potential legal action. The colonel chose to support the investigation's recommendations, recognizing that meaningful change required leadership commitment at all levels. He announced comprehensive policy changes designed to eliminate discriminatory practices and ensure equal treatment for all soldiers regardless of gender. Master Sergeant Johnson was formally disciplined and reassigned to a position where he would have no supervisory authority over other soldiers. His reduction in rank and loss of responsibilities sent a clear message that discriminatory behavior would not be tolerated. For Sarah, the investigation's conclusion represented both vindication and a new beginning. Her decision to refuse the broken rifle had exposed systemic problems that affected many soldiers beyond herself. The reforms that followed would benefit future generations of female service members. However, Sarah also understood that policy changes alone would not immediately transform military culture. Real progress would require ongoing vigilance and commitment from soldiers at all levels to uphold principles of equality and respect. The experience had strengthened Sarah's resolve to continue serving and advocating for positive change within the military. She had demonstrated that individual courage could catalyze institutional reform, even in organizations as traditional and hierarchical as the armed forces. As she prepared for her next assignment, Sarah reflected on the lessons learned from this challenging period. She had discovered that standing up for principles sometimes required accepting personal risk and professional uncertainty. However, she had also learned that silent acceptance of discrimination ultimately harmed everyone by undermining military effectiveness and morale. The investigation's conclusion marked the end of one chapter in Sarah's military career, but it also represented the beginning of new opportunities to serve as a leader and advocate for positive change. Her experience had equipped her with valuable insights about organizational dynamics, leadership challenges, and the importance of maintaining integrity under pressure. The broken rifle incident had evolved from a single moment of equipment failure into a comprehensive examination of military culture and practices. The resulting reforms would have lasting impact on how female soldiers were treated and integrated into military operations. Sarah's courage in refusing to accept substandard equipment had demonstrated that individual actions could drive institutional change. Her willingness to challenge discriminatory practices had created opportunities for meaningful reform that would benefit countless soldiers in the future. 2 years had passed since Captain Sarah Martinez refused to use the broken rifle that would change not only her career, but military culture across multiple installations. Now promoted to major, Sarah stood before a classroom of junior officers at the Army War College, delivering a presentation on leadership and organizational change that had become one of the most requested sessions in the institution's curriculum. The reforms initiated by her courageous stand had rippled far beyond her original battalion. The Department of Defense had launched a comprehensive review of equipment distribution procedures, training opportunities, and performance evaluation systems across all branches of the military. Sarah's case had become a catalyst for examining how institutional bias affected military readiness and effectiveness. The presentation screen behind Sarah displayed statistics that told a remarkable story of transformation. In the 2 years since the broken rifle incident, formal complaints of discrimination had decreased by 60% across installations that had implemented the new policies. More significantly, performance metrics for female soldiers had improved dramatically when measured against objective standards rather than subjective evaluations. Major Jennifer Chun, the intelligence specialist who had testified during the original investigation, was now serving as Sarah's executive officer. She had received 2 promotions in 18 months after years of stagnation under the old system. Chen's experience demonstrated how removing barriers allowed talented soldiers to reach their full potential regardless of gender. The classroom was filled with officers from various military branches, representing the growing recognition that the lessons learned from Sarah's experience were applicable throughout the armed forces. These officers would return to their units as advocates for change, equipped with tools and strategies for identifying and addressing discriminatory practices. Sarah's presentation focused on practical leadership techniques rather than theoretical concepts. She discussed how to recognize unconscious bias, create inclusive environments, and build systems that evaluated performance based on objective criteria. Her approach emphasized military effectiveness and mission accomplishment rather than social justice arguments. One of the most powerful elements of her presentation involved case studies showing how discriminatory practices had actually weakened military units. When talented soldiers were marginalized or denied opportunities based on gender rather than merit, entire units suffered reduced capability and effectiveness. The broken rifle incident had taught Sarah valuable lessons about the relationship between individual courage and institutional change. She explained to her audience how a single act of refusing to accept unfair treatment had exposed systemic problems that affected hundreds of soldiers across multiple installations. During the question-and-answer session, a young lieutenant asked how to balance military discipline with the need to challenge unfair practices. This was a question Sarah encountered frequently, reflecting the ongoing tension between military hierarchy and the principle of equal treatment. Sarah's answer drew from her experience navigating this exact challenge. She emphasized that effective advocacy required careful preparation, professional presentation, and focus on mission impact rather than personal grievance. The key was demonstrating how discriminatory practices undermined military effectiveness rather than simply arguing for fairness in abstract terms. Another officer asked about the personal costs of challenging institutional practices. Sarah was honest about the difficulties she had faced, including social isolation, career uncertainty, and intense scrutiny from both supporters and critics. However, she also described the satisfaction of knowing that her actions had created opportunities for other soldiers to succeed. The presentation concluded with Sarah introducing several guest speakers who had been affected by the reforms initiated after her experience. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the combat medic from the original investigation, described how policy changes had opened new training opportunities and accelerated her career advancement. Colonel Williams, Sarah's former commander, also addressed the class. He had initially been reluctant to support comprehensive reforms, but had become one of their strongest advocates after witnessing the positive impact on unit performance and morale. His transformation demonstrated how leadership support was essential for meaningful organizational change. The colonel explained how the new policies had actually simplified his command responsibilities by establishing clear, objective criteria for equipment distribution, training assignments, and performance evaluation. The systematic approach reduced conflicts, improved fairness, and enhanced overall unit effectiveness. After the presentation, Sarah met privately with several officers who sought additional guidance about situations in their own units. These conversations revealed that discriminatory practices remained a challenge throughout the military, despite official policy changes and increased awareness. One captain described subtle forms of bias that were difficult to document or challenge through formal channels. Female soldiers in her unit were frequently assigned to administrative roles rather than field positions, limiting their opportunities for advancement and combat leadership experience. Sarah provided practical advice about gathering evidence, building coalitions of support, and presenting concerns through appropriate command channels. She emphasized the importance of focusing on specific behaviors and their impact on mission effectiveness rather than making general accusations of bias. The discussion highlighted ongoing challenges in transforming military culture. Policy changes could establish new procedures and standards, but changing deeply ingrained attitudes and behaviors required sustained effort over many years. Sarah's own career trajectory illustrated both the opportunities and obstacles that remained. Her promotion to major had been accelerated due to her demonstrated leadership capabilities and the positive attention generated by her advocacy for reform. However, she also faced scrutiny and skepticism from some colleagues who questioned whether her advancement was based on merit or political considerations. The experience had taught Sarah to focus on performance and results rather than perceptions or criticisms. She had consistently exceeded standards in every assignment, earning respect through competence and professionalism rather than relying on the publicity from her earlier experiences. During her current assignment at the War College, Sarah had been selected to lead a research project examining the relationship between military culture and operational effectiveness. The study was analyzing data from units that had implemented comprehensive equality initiatives compared to those operating under traditional practices. Preliminary findings suggested that diverse, inclusive units performed better on multiple measures, including innovation, problem-solving, and adaptability. These results supported the argument that equality initiatives enhanced rather than compromised military capability. The research project had attracted attention from senior military leaders and civilian policymakers who were seeking evidence-based approaches to military reform. Sarah's work was contributing to broader discussions about how armed forces could maintain effectiveness while adapting to changing social expectations and demographics. As Sarah prepared for her next assignment, she reflected on the unexpected direction her career had taken since the morning she was handed a broken rifle. What had begun as a routine training exercise had evolved into a career-defining experience that influenced military policy across the entire Department of Defense. The transformation hadn't been easy or straightforward. Sarah had faced criticism, uncertainty, and professional challenges that tested her commitment to military service. However, she had also discovered that individual courage could create positive change that extended far beyond personal circumstances. The broken rifle had become a symbol of how small acts of integrity could expose larger systemic problems and catalyze meaningful reform. Sarah's refusal to accept substandard equipment had demonstrated that maintaining professional standards required standing up to discrimination and bias wherever they occurred. The incident had also illustrated the importance of institutional support for individual courage. Colonel Williams' decision to back Sarah during the confrontation with Master Sergeant Johnson had been crucial in preventing retaliation and enabling a fair investigation. Without leadership support, individual acts of courage could easily be suppressed or punished. Sarah's experience had shown how media attention and public scrutiny could accelerate institutional change. The coverage of her story had created pressure for comprehensive reform that might not have occurred through internal channels alone. However, she had also learned that external attention brought both opportunities and risks that required careful navigation. The most satisfying aspect of the entire experience had been witnessing the positive impact on other soldiers' careers and experiences. Dozens of female service members had benefited from the policy changes and cultural shifts initiated by Sarah's actions. Their success stories provided evidence that the challenges and risks had been worthwhile. As Sarah packed her belongings for transfer to a new assignment, she discovered the original media articles about the broken rifle incident. Reading them again after 2 years, she was struck by how the story had been framed in terms of gender discrimination and military culture rather than the broader issues of fairness and professional standards. The media narrative had been important in generating support for reform, but Sarah had always viewed the incident primarily through the lens of military professionalism and leadership responsibility. Her refusal to use defective equipment had been about maintaining standards and ensuring safety rather than making a statement about women's rights. This perspective had been crucial in building support for change within military circles. By focusing on operational effectiveness and professional standards rather than social justice arguments, Sarah had been able to build coalitions that included traditionalist officers who might have been resistant to reform framed in different terms. The approach had demonstrated that advocacy for equality could be successful when presented as advocacy for military excellence. The most compelling argument for change had been evidence showing how discriminatory practices undermined unit effectiveness and mission accomplishment. Sarah's new assignment would take her to a combat unit preparing for overseas deployment. She would serve as deputy commander, responsible for training and operational readiness in a high-stakes environment where performance standards were absolute and unforgiving. The assignment represented both recognition of her capabilities and a test of her ability to lead in combat conditions. Sarah understood that her performance would be scrutinized closely, as female officers in senior combat roles remained relatively uncommon and often faced heightened expectations. However, she approached the challenge with confidence based on her training, experience, and the lessons learned from navigating institutional change. The broken rifle incident had taught her valuable skills in leadership, advocacy, and organizational dynamics that would serve her well in any assignment. As Sarah departed the War College, she carried with her a sense of responsibility to continue advocating for positive change throughout her military career. The experience had shown her that individual courage could create lasting impact, but also that sustained effort was required to maintain progress and prevent backsliding. The broken rifle had been repaired and returned to service after proper maintenance. Sarah sometimes wondered if other soldiers using that weapon knew its history or understood its symbolic significance. The rifle had become a reminder that equipment failures, like institutional failures, could be fixed with proper attention and commitment to excellence. The story of Captain Sarah Martinez and the broken rifle had become part of military folklore, taught in leadership courses and cited in policy discussions. However, for Sarah, the most important legacy was the knowledge that future generations of soldiers would serve in a more equitable and professional environment where merit and performance determined opportunities rather than prejudice and bias. The transformation was far from complete, and challenges remained throughout the military. However, the foundation had been established for continued progress toward a force that truly embodied the principles of equality, professionalism, and excellence that defined American military values at their best.